I'm just about to reveal the 6 best foods for fast weight loss. Stay tuned. Jase Stuart here, the Better Body Coach, and I help everyday busy men get back in shape by empowering them and building their confidence. In today's session, I'm going to answer one of the most common questions I get. What are the best foods for fast weight loss? And if I could break it down to just a handful of foods, these are the ones that I'd be selecting and recommending without digging up too much work. And I'm going to start by explaining to you the reasons that I have selected these foods. Now, in order for these foods to get on the list, they need to have met, one or two of the 3 key components that I would be looking for in a weight loss food. Okay, so let's get started. The first of these is going to be that the food needs to have a low calorie to weight ratio, or I'd put that in common sense terms, a low calorie density. Why is that important? Well, what we want to be getting is foods that give us bang for our buck. We don't want to be having refined foods where we eat them, and when we eat them, they're dumping lots of empty calories without giving us much back in. And an example of this would be alcohol. Okay, alcohol is a very high density or high calorie to weight food. We drink it in and we're shoveling in tons and tons and tons of calories, and versus the actual total weight and how full that makes us feel, that's obviously giving us the wrong end of the stick. So firstly, our foods need to have a low calorie to weight ratio. The second component that I want to see in my foods are that they are very filling, or that they rate high on the satiety index. And what that is a measure of how full a food makes you feel after you're eating it. So I'm looking particularly for foods that are high in protein and fiber. And there's a very, very simple reason why I'm looking for those foods, and that is because those foods take longer to break down in your digestive system. So when they're sitting around in your stomach and your intestines for longer, that's slowing down that feeling of having an empty stomach. So therefore, because you're fuller for longer, it's kind of like saying, after you scull 2 liters of water, you feel slightly full for a while. The water moves through quick, but foods with a high satiety index stick around in your gut for a much longer period. Now, the third component, which might help, is the impact that a food has on our blood sugar level. And what we're really talking about here is our glycemic index. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been to a Chinese meal where you've stuffed yourself full of white rice? White rice is a processed carbohydrate food. You've stuffed yourself full of white rice, you leave there completely full, but then half an hour to an hour later, you feel like you're hungry again, like you need to eat a sweet, like you need to finish yourself off. And the reason for that is that processed foods basically shoot up your blood sugar level and bring it straight back down. So you release this burst of insulin to get the sugar out of your blood, but the insulin hangs around and says, okay, what are you gonna feed me now? Now that I've taken and dealt with all that sugar, what's next? So you get these peaks and troughs. We want to be avoiding that. So without further ado, let's get into the list of the 6 foods that I've picked. Number 1 on the list of the best weight loss foods is chicken breast, or as I like to call it, protein bird. Chicken or poultry breasts are awesome, and that's because of 2 reasons. The low calorie density and the protein content, meaning that we stay fuller for longer. So if we look at the calorie content of some comparable items, 100 grams of chicken breast versus, for example, 100 grams of McDonald's McChicken burger. So we'll find in the first one, the chicken breast, 165 calories. In the McChicken, it'll be nearly double. And that's gonna come down to the fact that it's fried in the McChicken, and also the sugar content of the bun. So you'll find near double the amount of calories for the same amount or same weight of food. So that gives it a low calorie density. The second thing to think about is the type of the chicken, the part of the chicken that you actually use. So 165 calories per 100 gram is the chicken breast. You're looking at about 210 calories per 100 gram for the chicken thigh, and that's the difference in the fat content. Let's just go down to looking at one whole chicken breast. You're looking at about 284 calories, and of that 284 calories, 53 grams of protein versus 6 grams of fat. So that's basically 80% of the calories are being provided by protein. So if you think of this in the guise of what I told you at the start, that protein keeps you fuller for longer, what a fantastic thing to have the vast majority of the calories being provided by protein. You're going to stay fuller for longer, it's going to take longer to pass through your digestive system, and that's going to be meaning that you're well less likely to go through these ups and downs in hunger spikes. Number 2 on the list of the best foods for fast weight loss has got to be cottage cheese. It is so versatile. Now, I usually have cottage cheese with my eggs, so smear it on your English whole grain muffins, stick it into your salads, your fruit salads or your more savory salads, or you know what, if you have yourself a pancake meal, substitute out the ice cream for cottage cheese, and even as a substitute for mayonnaise. Now check out the 2 reasons. Once again, it comes down to calorie density and the high protein content. 1 cup of cottage cheese contains 165 calories. Again, put that into perspective. 150 calories are found in your standard bottle of beer and nearly the same in a whole cup of cheese, cottage cheese. And we tend to think of cheese as being really, really fattening. Well, for the large part, that's true. Cottage cheese is the exception. We'll find 28 grams of protein and only 2 grams of fat in a cup of cottage cheese. If you compare that to your brie cheese, it's going to be over quadruple with 800 calories in a cup of brie cheese. That's coming from nearly double the protein, which is good, but 66 grams of fat. This is a huge amount of fat, and this is the reason why it's so much more calorie dense. So number 2 on the list, get your cottage cheese in. Well guys, the list couldn't be complete without making sure that number 3 is taken up by, you guessed it, eggs, my favorite. I did a recent video on these and their incredible nutrition benefits, and especially as part of a weight loss diet. And here's the reason why. The energy density is super low. 1 egg contains just 77 calories. So if you were to have 3 eggs for breakfast, maybe accompany that with some whole grain muffins, for example, you're looking at, from the eggs, around 220 calories. Now, remembering that 1 beer contains 150 calories, that's pretty good bang for buck, isn't it, right? You get filled up with over 6 grams of protein per egg, and you're going to be satiated for a lot longer. Because of the protein, these rank really high in keeping you fuller for longer. Now, one thing that's really important is you need to be mindful of how you're cooking eggs. I'd love you to stick to either boiled or poached eggs, and the reason is you're not adding extra calories. If you fry your eggs in fat, they're going to absorb some of the calories, and even more so if you scramble your eggs and add in butter and milk, you're going to be doubling or tripling the calorie content. So stick to the poachies or the boiled, which taste the best anyway, with a sprinkling of salt. One thing I do want to note is if you do want to top it up, if you did want to, for example, do scrambled eggs, keep the butter out, maybe stick some light milk in, and then stick in some egg whites instead of whole eggs. For each egg white, you're only getting 16 calories and 4 grams of protein. And this is obviously, you've heard before of bodybuilders using this as a way to bulk up their protein content. That's the exact reason why. You've got to get eggs as part of your diet, guys. Number 4 on the list, guys, you are gonna either love it or hate it, and it's the collection of foods that we call cruciferous vegetables. Now, these include broccoli, collie, cabbage, and Brussels. And I'll be the first to admit, if you don't know how to cook these, they can be horrible. My mum used to serve these to me boiled and bland when I was a kid, and I hated it. But then when we got a bit older, she introduced the wok style, where she flew them up in some soy sauce or some oyster sauce, and then things got real, and I absolutely fell in love. So I want to focus on broccoli and why this is such a great food for weight loss. So 1 cup of broccoli contains only 31 calories. To put that into perspective, if you were to try to compare the calories in broccoli to beer, you'd need to have 5 cups of broccoli to be the equivalent of just 1 beer. So they meet our requirements for this list of 6 because they're so low in their calorie density. Basically, the way that they achieve this is by being over 90% water. So if you crushed it down, squeezed it out, only 10% of the actual vegetable is substance. The other 90% of is actually water, which water doesn't contain any calories. But in that 10%, you get some beautiful results. You get substantial amount of protein for a vegetable, but most importantly, you get a very high fiber content. And why is fiber important? Well, for a few reasons. It keeps us regular, working like a sponge to drag all the garbage through our guts because we can't digest fiber. And the other thing that fiber does is keeps us fuller for longer. That's why number 4 is cruciferous vegetables. That brings us to number 5, guys, and it is tuna, one of my favorites, and we can have it in 2 major forms. We can either have it in fresh format, either as, say, for example, sashimi or a cooked fillet, or we could have it in the canned format. Now let's look at the 2 differences. 100 grams of fresh, say, sashimi tuna would look like this: 130 calories and 13 grams of protein. So again, this calorie density, the bang for the buck that you're getting is really, really low. In the canned form, and what I've done here is put the numbers of a drained version. So that means the oil that's been drained, just squeezing the lid down and tipping in the sink, is 128 calories. So slightly higher, or the same amount for a slightly smaller amount, and 16 grams of protein. So all in all, basically the same, but the most important thing is here, in both circumstances, the calorie density is low, the protein content's high, so as a mixture, it's not going to contribute a lot to your overall calorie intake for the day. And then secondly, it's going to keep you fuller for longer. Now, most often, I'd be having tuna as a lunch in the canned form, or dinner as a cooked fillet. I like to have my tuna with brown rice and a bunch of veggies, and that's basically the way that I'd incorporate this into the diet, and I recommend you do the same. And that brings us to the last, number 6 of the best weight loss foods. And I've got to tell you guys, I've cheated a little bit here because I've used a category as opposed to a specific food. So what is it? It is unprocessed carbohydrates, number 6. So what do I mean by unprocessed carbohydrates? Well, I see carbohydrates coming in 2 forms. We have the refined form, which is snacks, sugars, pastry, white versions of carbohydrates like white rice, white bread and the like. Or we have the unprocessed ones. These are the ones that have had minimal damage done to them. So they are either vegetables in their raw form, like sweet potatoes, corn, potatoes and the like, or our carbohydrate foods like rice, pasta, but in their whole grain or completely unprocessed form. So that is brown or black versions of these. Or the grainy breads like rye, or the 10 seeds breads, or whatever you like. Now, the reason that these are part of the list is that they are very high in fiber. So despite the fact that they are not a protein-based food, they do contain protein, but generally speaking, their fiber content keeps you fuller for longer. So what it does is acts almost like the same way the protein does. It slows down digestion and means that you stay satiated for a longer time. The second thing specifically that unprocessed carbohydrates do, as opposed to the other refined types of carbohydrates, is that they don't dump a bunch of sugar into your blood all at once. In fact, because of the way that they're broken down, the sugar is released more slowly and gradually over time. And what this is means you don't get these spikes in your blood sugar, which cause cravings like you do when you get, sugary foods that give you that hit and you get the insulin floating around in your blood for longer. So there it is, number 6 on the list, unprocessed carbohydrates. Well, that brings us to the end of our 6 best foods for fast weight loss, guys. And these are the same foods that I would be really recommending to you if you're part of my coaching program. These are the same foods that I eat on a constant basis. These are foods that make up a very high proportion of what I eat weekly. And the reason is, to recap, they either contain a fair amount of protein or fiber, they don't mess up my blood sugar levels, but most importantly, the calorie density is down when you compare it to other refined high sugar, high fat products. And that's really gonna help in your weight management effort. It all comes down to calorie balance. What I do wanna remind you guys is, don't be so silly to kind of buy into this concept of superfoods and that these foods are going to allow you to do whatever you want with the rest of your diet. It's not the case. In fact, if you were eating like me for the majority of these foods being part of your diet, but then you were dumping in 2 liters of Coca-Cola a day, you're going to find it impossible to manage your weight. So we've got to look at the totality of the whole diet, guys, not just foods in singular formats. So these are the ones that form the basis of your diet, but what's really important is what you're doing on those other days around these foods, because you can really undo all the good work with just a few poor choices. So if you liked this video, guys, please subscribe, please comment, please ask questions below, share the video up for me. I'd really love you to come into my community. And with that, I will see you on the next video, guys, and thanks for watching.